to our podcast. This is another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego, with video production and studio provided by MaxLux Media, sponsored by Dorado Nutrition, with your host being myself, Steve Wire, a freelance reporter. This podcast is dedicated to fostering quality dialogue surrounding all things local policy related in North County, San Diego. Join us weekly as we interview political leaders, analysts, professionals, and community members on issues ranging from homelessness to housing density to elections.
Howdy, y'all, and welcome to an episode of the Stay Classy podcast. No, I am not Stephen Wire. I am Corey Elder, a host of a podcast called Howdy, and a friend of Stephen's while he is away on vacation in Germany. Today, I'm very excited to introduce our guest, Dr. Seth Shostak. Seth directs the search for extraterrestrials at the SETI Institute in California, trying to find out evidence of intelligent life in space. He is also committed to getting the public, especially young people, excited about astrobiology and science in general. Examples of this are his reception of the Klumpke-Roberts Award that he won in 2004 for outstanding contributions to the public understanding and appreciation of astronomy, as well as the Carl Sagan Prize for Science Popularization in 2015. Seth, thank you so much for coming on.
A real pleasure, Corey.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting with you, especially obviously recently with the release of information from the CIA. As you know, there's a lot of popularity going on around UFOs and UAPs, but I do want to take a step back and first and foremost understand your story and how you became interested in science as a whole, but also more in particular astronomy.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a pretty short story. I don't imagine it'll take more than an hour and a half to fill you in. But I mean, I was always interested in science. As a kid, I was interested in science. So that was nothing new. And when I went to college, I studied physics. That's what my father said I should do. So I did it. And then eventually went to graduate school in California and studied astronomy there. So that's kind of the abbreviated version. Anything longer is bound to be tedious.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get into, is just understanding the story, understanding where passions ultimately ignited from. Obviously, in studying physics, something changed to the point where once you got to the point where you're pursuing your graduate degree, you switched over to astronomy, specifically with the specialization, at least in your career, to astrobiology. What happened during that time in college where you started focusing on that?
Well, yeah, nothing terribly. Actually, I was interested in astronomy since I was a kid as well. I mean, I built a telescope when I was 10 years old. I think that story is very common. A lot of people who are in astronomy have done the same. And in particular, I was interested in the idea of life in space because I went to a lot of cheesy sci-fi films when I was a kid. So that kind of kindled my... I mean, I also was interested in making films with less cheesy plots. And we did make quite a number of films, but they were kind of cheesy, actually.
They turned out being cheesy nonetheless.
Yes.
Gotcha. How'd you build the telescope?
Oh, listen, I didn't grind the mirror. The real aficionados ground their own mirrors, but I got a mirror from, I forget where, it was via a friend or whatever. And then I bought a cardboard tube and, to put it all together. It was pretty good for looking at the moon and the planets, which is, what you normally look at with a small telescope.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty incredible. Do you remember how old you were when you created this? I know that you first picked up a solar system book at around 10, but when did telescopes happen?
Oh, that was before I was 11. I mean, it doesn't take very long.
Okay. I just feel like I was a little bit behind when I was a kid, but we'll catch up eventually. Cool. I also understand, as you kind of mentioned, that you've worked quite a bit on TV shows. You've made some of your own movies. I know that you've also been in specific movies. How did you kind of find the interest in entertainment that came up? Well,
as I say, I was addicted to these cheap science fiction films that, there was kind of an era of maybe 5 or 10 years in which Hollywood cranked out a lot of, if you will, B movies that were sci-fi films. They were often, monster films, whereas, the U.S. military would, make an atomic test somewhere, and it would result in mutated species in the Californian desert, giant ants or something like that. And they would immediately go to Los Angeles and invade Los Angeles. Because after all, if you're a mutated critter, that's where you want to go, Los Angeles, because there's a lot of fast food, whatever.
Right.
So I kind of noticed that they all had pretty much the same plot. We thought we would make some films that were a different plot. Mind you, these were not theatrical films. They were on 16 millimeter film. We had to we had to build our own sound system and so forth. And while they were popular with the local kids, they weren't very popular.
Sure. Can I ask what they were about in particular? I know that you wanted to make something a little bit less cheesy. Maybe it became cheesy, but what were those about?
Well, I think the last one that we made, and it was a fairly long one actually, was called The Teenage Monster Blob from Outer Space, which I was. And it starred 6 pounds of Play-Doh.
Starred 6 pounds of Play-Doh. What I got to know what the plot was. Obviously, there's a teenage monster blob that comes in from outer space, but does it also attack Los Angeles? What's special about it?
Well, in that case, it attacked Washington, D.C., because I grew up near D.C., and in the summers, we would work on the film. So D.C. was the setting. We had to go up to the steps of the Capitol, actually, and come back burping after it had devoured a couple of Congress people.
Okay, gotcha. I love that it had to add that burping in there. Obviously, I know that you've worked on a couple of TV shows as well, and I'm interested to know how that sparks. Like, where do people start reaching? Like, when was it that people started reaching out for your guidance and your expertise to be an advisor to certain films? I saw that you worked with Star Trek, et cetera.
Yeah, well, the answer is never. I mean, I didn't really work with them. I was on them. Mm-hmm. I was on these shows, and it was the case that eventually they would call up or fly me down to Los Angeles or whatever to, kind of massage the scripts for these films, sometimes TV shows, mm-hmm. and try and make them more accurate. Now, this was a misconception of Hollywood that if a film or a TV show were more accurate, that somehow it would be better. Mm. But of course, that's not true. I mean, making it more accurate doesn't make it any more interesting, right? The most interesting ones are the ones that had either a clever idea for the storyline or they had interesting characters or whatever. Mm-hmm. Scientific accuracy was always something that wasn't terribly important in making sure that the public would flock to the theaters to see these films.
Right. And I think that that's kind of an ongoing theme that you've discovered in different things throughout your career, right? Like even most recently with the release of like information from David Gersh. I know that you, for example, kind of recognized that there were inabilities to point out accurate statistics or any sort of evidence towards that being true. And that's kind of like why it's becoming popularized and fun. We'll get on that in a little bit, but I do want to ask a little bit more about like your history, your story. I understand that you've written a number of books as well. Would love to know a little bit more about the books in particular. Like, how does Confessions of an Alien Hunter, what's going on in that, and what did you find?
Well, Confessions of an Alien Hunter is in fact kind of a narrative about work we do here at the SETI Institute here in Northern California, where we're doing what Jodie Foster tried to do in the movie Contact, and that is prove that there's somebody out there by eavesdropping on any radio signals they may be transmitting. So that, it was somewhat autobiographical, actually, but it just described the efforts that science is making to try and see if there's anybody out there. And the other books were similarly themed. Each one had a different sort of take on it all, but they were basically describing the science. So they're nonfiction books.
Yeah.
No great storyline, but I hope some information.
Mm-hmm. With that, would you mind describing a little bit more and explaining, obviously, what the SETI Institute is, what you do there, and what you found maybe?
Yeah. Well, the SETI Institute is a nonprofit research organization. It's like Woods Hole or some of these other research organizations that do, in our case, mostly basic research, not so much basic research. Let me retract that. But what we do is research that's relevant to the whole question of whether there's life in space. So, that would be trying to answer questions like, well, how does life get started in the first place? And where do we find it? I mean, is there, life on Mars? It's everybody's favorite planet for life, it seems. And how could we find it? We haven't found it yet. Some of the moons of Jupiter, a couple of moons of Saturn, these are all places where you have liquid water, so you could have life. But if you will, our first project here, the first research endeavor of the SETI Institute, was trying to find intelligent life by pointing giant antennas at nearby star systems, hoping to pick up a signal that somebody there might be sending into space.
Yeah, the thought process that essentially they would also be trying to communicate with somebody here.
Well, they might be doing that, but who knows? But they might be broadcasting into space willy-nilly because, they probably are using radio for communication. For example, if we had colonies on Mars, for example, how would we communicate with those colonies on Mars? Well, we'd have big radio setups and do it that way. And when you do that, yes, you may broadcast something to Mars, but inevitably those signals go out into space. So if the aliens are doing anything similar, not that they need to get in touch with us particularly, but if they are communicating with, colonies or whatever, we might be able to pick up those broadcasts.
Okay, lovely. As well, kind of you mentioned that at the SETI Institute, you're trying to define, maybe how do we even locate whether or not life is existing in another location? You brought up a couple locations, such as the moons around Jupiter and Saturn. You also brought up Mars because of the fact that these theoretically could have water or liquid water on their surface. I'm interested as well. What else are you looking for? I understand valence electrons, things with 4 valence electrons and high amount of molecules such as carbon are obviously necessary, but I don't know all the science behind it. I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit on that as well as others.
Yeah, it's true that as they like to say on Star Trek, we're a carbon-based life form. They always talk about carbon-based life, and it is true. All life on Earth is carbon-based, and it's because of those, 4 covalent bonds that carbon has. It likes to hook up and make big, complicated molecules that, challenge pre-med students who are forced to take organic chemistry. But, the chemistry throughout the universe is the same. The fact that carbon is fairly common here on Earth, it's not particular to Earth. Carbon is commonplace throughout the universe. We know that from astronomy. So, we don't know what the aliens might have for their basic chemistry, but it's a pretty good bet that a lot of them, if not all of them, are based on carbon. So, by understanding how carbon is used to produce life or to sustain life or whatever here on Earth, that probably gives you some insight into what the aliens may be like. Sometimes the aliens are silicon-based, but silicon-based is actually not so different from carbon-based.
So obviously we have the liquid water, we have carbon, maybe silicon, because of the fact that it also has those 4 valence electrons, allows it to make more complicated structures. What else might you be looking for?
That's about it. You need a source of energy, but if they're on a planet orbiting some star, you're getting a source of energy there, just the starlight. If you write down the elements that are used in life here on Earth, there are about 10 of them that are very common in life. And then there's, trace amounts of other elements. But those 10 elements that are found in essentially every life form here on Earth, they're very common throughout the universe again. There's nothing terribly special, in other words, about Earth when it comes to life, at least as an abode for life. It is true that Earth is the only place we know that actually has life, but that may just be ignorance. That may not be, telling us that, life is very uncommon. It just means we haven't found it yet.
Yeah. And what are the odds, or kind of obviously it's something that's being considered at the SETI Institute, and I'd love to know a little bit more about how you guys are thinking about it. But what are the odds that there's a form of life that we don't actually recognize as life yet? So what is life to the SETI Institute?
Well, nobody knows what life is, actually. There's no good definition of life. That may seem strange, but it's the truth. Normally, if you open up a 10th grade biology textbook, they'll try and define life in the first chapter, but all they can do is say, life reproduces, or life metabolizes, or life does this, that, and the other thing, but it doesn't really define what life is. It may be that you just have to agree that you'll know it when you see it. And maybe that's all you can say about life. But does that mean that life can be anything, that we have no handle on what life might be like? It could mean that, but probably it doesn't. I would bet that if we find life on Mars, it won't have DNA, but it will have some compound that serves the same function as DNA, that has the, if you will, the instructions for life to reproduce and things like that. May not be DNA, maybe QNA, who knows what, but it will have, an analogous function.
Gotcha. I'm interested, when did it go from, so obviously you get your degree at Caltech. What happens between that and then moving into the SETI Institute?
Well, they had to give me a key first. What happened was that I took a postdoc at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory in lovely Charlottesville, Virginia. And then after that, I worked for a year in Philadelphia. And after that, I got an invitation to come to the West Coast to be in a startup with one of my brothers. And after that, the SETI Institute found out that I was in the state, and they called me up and offered me a job. That's what happened.
Okay. And then at some point as well, you had the opportunity to work in the Netherlands. What happened there?
Yeah, that's true. I did. After I had worked in Philadelphia, I went to the Netherlands for 2 years. I was working at a university there in the astronomy department. And we actually did some SETI research there, too, actually. The Netherlands is big in radio astronomy, maybe not surprisingly, because, the weather in the Netherlands is not great for an optical telescope. It's usually cloudy and rainy. So, but radio telescopes don't worry about such things. So they were big on radio astronomy. And so, that's what I was doing as my day job there in the Netherlands. But, I also did other things, I have to say. I mean, one was doing SETI using the radio telescopes in Europe. It was maybe the first time that any radio telescopes in Europe were used for SETI, I think. And I also started a computer animation company and, lots of different things. But in terms of the science, it was radio astronomy.
Gotcha. And radio astronomy, is that trying to pick up the radio waves, or are you also sending out any radio waves?
No, we don't broadcast. We leave that to, the the top 40 stations. We don't broadcast. The real reason you don't broadcast to the aliens, a lot of people think it's because, you might only prompt them to send their interstellar battle wagons to Earth and, flatten Covina or something. But that isn't the reason. The reason you don't broadcast is because, let's say, the nearest alien civilization is 50 light years away, which is relatively close, actually. It'll take 50 years for your transmission to get to them. And if they decide to reply, that'll be another 50 years. So 100 years will have gone by, and you'll probably have lost your funding by then. Yeah,
everybody's already passed away as well, and good luck.
Yep.
Actually, that's one of the interesting things that you noted in your writing on the David Grush thing is you mentioned that it doesn't violate physics to go from one planet to another, even if that planet is in orbit around another star, right? So supposing that there was extraterrestrial life, what would be the way that they would be able to travel quickly enough to basically get to Earth from another star to our solar system? Like, what are the physics there that aren't being violated?
Well, I mean, you could do it. You could do it at, a walking speed. If there was, I mean, it just depends on how long you want to wait until you get there.
Gotcha.
That's the only point. And, we judge that on the basis of what our life expectancies are, typically 50 to 100 years. So if the trip takes, 50,000 years, you're not going to undertake it, right? It's not very interesting.
Yeah,
so
makes sense.
Everything is scaled to our lifetimes. And in order to go to the stars, even the nearest star, at the speed of light takes something over 4 years. Okay, maybe you could sit in a rocket for 4 years if you had plenty of good reading material. But, if you say, I want to go to a star 1,000 light years away, you really can't manage that because you won't be alive when it gets there. There are some subtleties there that have to do with relativity, but never mind any of that. The point is, the point is this. Because my internet connection is unstable. So are the people here. Okay, or at least I am. Yeah. Yes. What was the point? What was the point? The point is that, we can't go to the stars. They can't come here, despite what you see on TV.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not on. It's very, very difficult to do that. And, you can say that's just a technology problem. At some level, perhaps it is. But even forgetting the technology of building a very, very fast rocket, there's also the physics that the amount of energy required is enormous if you want to go at very high speed. So I don't know that there are too many societies that are gallivanting around the galaxy.
Yeah,
it's really hard. It's really hard.
That poses a good question, right? Like, suppose that there was extraterrestrial life, and let's say that it is light years upon light years away. What value, kind of, if somebody asked you, like you, as I guess I'm doing right now, what would be the inherent value of recognizing that it's there? Like, for SETI's mission, why is it important to know that there's other life in the universe?
Well, I think it's basically curiosity, right? I mean, if you grab the next 10 people off the street and said, do you think that there are aliens out there? I think a high percentage of them would say, oh, yeah, probably. But on what basis do they say that? They say that on the basis of thinking that it would be interesting to know, and hard to believe that we're the only kids on the block, right? But beyond that, they don't know. It would be really interesting to know, as opposed to just thinking it might be nice if we had some neighbors. Mm-hmm. And, you could twist your head around the idea that maybe we could learn something important if there are other societies out there, here's the cure for death or whatever. I mean, something that would be useful, but, you don't know whether that would happen anyhow. So you just have to look at it as something that would be interesting to know. It would be like asking, the citizenry of Europe in 1491, do you think there's, any societies on the other side of all that water out to the west here? And, they might say yes, they might say no, but you say, but would you like to know if there are? And I think a lot of people would say, yeah, I'd like to know, just to know.
Yeah, just to know kind of what else is out there. And then obviously we can figure out from there what we would do with it. There might be an inherent value. As you mentioned, maybe this other society or community is able to give us something, or rather maybe we could give something to them. I am interested to know, if there is life out there, do you think it would be more progressed than us or less?
Well, I mean, the universe is, about 13 or 14 billion years old. That's the time since the Big Bang. Now, the Earth is like 4 billion years old, so like a third of that. So if, life is not very difficult to get started, and then eventually to evolve into something that we would call intelligent, then the majority of other societies out there are more advanced than we are, right? Because we've only been around for 4.5 billion years. The universe has been around for 3 times that. So there's been plenty of time for other societies to get way ahead of us. Maybe they're not all more advanced than we are, right? There may be life on Mars, but it's not more advanced than we are, as far as we know, but I'm pretty sure it's not.
Or it's really sneaky, or it's like super advanced and just very sneaky.
It's all underground. Yeah. But, I mean, so some of it will be more advanced, some of it will be less advanced, but there'll be more that are more advanced simply because of the time scales involved.
Okay. And in your mind, what's the percentage likelihood that there is life somewhere else in this vast expanse?
Nobody knows. But all you can say is that the number of planets in the Milky Way is on the order of 1 trillion. It's 10 to the 12th trillion, a million. And, what are the probabilities that, well, yeah, there are all those planets out there, and maybe 1 in 10 or even 1 in 100 is somewhat like the Earth with liquid water and all that sort of thing. But maybe they're all sterile. Well, yeah, maybe they are, but that would make us very special. And normally in science, if your argument is that we're very special, your argument's probably wrong.
Gotcha. So there's a good, like you mentioned, right? So there's decent odds, right, that there's life somewhere else in the universe, at least kind of from what we just mentioned. At least there's kind of bad odds that we are unique in that we're the only location with life. And then as well, we have a lot of societies that would be more advanced than humanity, right? Just given our age within the universe. If other life did come to visit, do you think it's possible that it could be under wraps and like not even by like the US government or anything, but just like by their own accord in trying to keep things underground?
I don't know why they would be cryptic. If they can come here, they're much more advanced than we are anyhow, right? So it's a bit like saying that, doggone it, when the Europeans visited New England, right? They had to keep the whole thing quiet because, doggone it, it might be dangerous for them if the locals knew that they were there. They didn't have to worry about the locals. They had guns after all, right? So, I think that if they can come here, if they have that capability, they have the capability to defend themselves and wipe us out if that's really what's on their brain, although it seems like an expensive project for them.
Yeah. And maybe they want Earth. Maybe it is a really cool planet.
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you think there's any chance that we've been visited by extraterrestrial life here on Earth?
Well, it's hard to rule that out. I mean, suppose they came 100 million years ago, right? And they took a few photos of the dinosaurs or whatever and then left. How would you ever know? You wouldn't know unless they wanted you to know by leaving something, a monolith or something,
Pyramids.
Okay. Yeah, something. Pyramids. We know how old the pyramids are, but yeah, they could. I don't know. They could leave instructions for really good chili or something. But I think that if they wanted us to know that they had been here, they could manage to do that, unless they came so long ago that all that evidence would be gone simply by natural processes.
Does SETI have an official position on like whether or not life has visited Earth with respect to the stuff that's coming up from like David Grush, the 2004 sighting of the Tic Tac type airplane or Tic Tac type aviation?
Tic Tac type of candies?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I don't know anybody here at the Institute, aside from myself, I have to say, who's even aware of David Grush's statements. They don't pay much attention to that. We don't do any UFO research. We leave that up to late night radio hosts.
Gotcha. Okay. For yourself, obviously, you've done a little bit more research on it. Can I ask maybe like, what do you think that was fueled by an interest in like these sci-fi movies when you were a kid, or like what effectively allows, like, why are you more interested in it than the average SETI researcher?
No, I think you've hit it, Corey. It was because of those cheesy movies. Yeah, I've always been interested in the idea.
Gotcha.
After all, it's not so unusual to be interested in the idea of alien visitors. I haven't seen too many here. A couple of people from Southern California, but that's basically it.
Okay. If you were the king of the world, right, what would, with respect to aliens, or with respect to actually just not even extraterrestrial life, but just with respect to like space programs and what you would do next, what would you be investing money in? Obviously, NASA is looking into developing the Gateway soon. How would you be investing money towards space in general?
Well, I don't think that NASA gets it wrong too often, actually, because NASA's not just one guy making decisions about where to spend the research dollars. The most interesting thing for the public, and for that matter, even for NASA, is the question of life. Has life sprung up anywhere else nearby where you could actually find it, right? Find it directly. And so, NASA is continuing to design programs to explore Mars more carefully, right? And particularly to dig down a little bit into the Martian dirt. There may be stuff down there. But not only, as we've discussed it a bit earlier, to send missions to the 3 moons of Jupiter that have liquid water on their surfaces, and a couple of moons of Saturn with similar situations. There are like 7 other places in our solar system where liquid water may exist. And if you have liquid water and you have 4 billion years of it sitting there, it's not terribly unreasonable to assume that life has cooked up on some of these other worlds. So, and NASA is well aware of that, and they're trying to look.
Okay.
Hey there, San Diego. If you're on the hunt for a way to enhance your health, I have a great recommendation for you. Dorado Nutrition is a company that's all about helping people live their best lives through top-notch American-made supplements. Their expert team has crafted products to support a variety of health needs, from weight management to muscle building and more. And with ingredients like Vidosia agrestis and Tongkat Ali, praised by a well-known neurobiologist seen on the Joe Rogan podcast, these supplements could be just what you need to reach your health goals. And for a limited time, you can get 25% off your purchase by using promo code SD2023 at checkout. So if you're looking for a way to improve your health, Dorado Nutrition might just be the solution you need.
With respect to searching for life in other planets, obviously there's also the interest of people moving to other planets, and with a lot of people interested in investing for us moving to Mars and everything along those lines. How do you feel about those incentives for humanity to become extraterrestrial in and of themselves?
No, it sounds good to me. I mean, look, all you have to do is consider, well, suppose nobody were interested, right? I mean, humanity has been around for what? A couple of 100,000 years have been Homo sapiens, something like that. Not much more than that. Now, I don't know what the future of humanity is likely to be, but if you're optimistic, maybe we'll still be here a million years from now. The sharks, they go back something like a million years, at least I think so. So, they're going to be humans here for a long time unless we are very, very efficient in getting rid of everybody. That is actually hard to do. It's hard to get rid of everybody. You can get rid of some people, but you can't get rid of everybody, right? And so given that, right, it's only reasonable to consider, well, we can't all continue to just live on one ball of rock here. We've got to consider the possibility of moving somewhere else, or at least getting some of the people off the planet. And although it's nice to think of colonies on Mars, that is the possibility. It's a real possibility. I think maybe more practical are schemes to build orbiting space colonies. This was a big deal back in the 1960s and 70s. We just build space stations, giant space stations. They still make appearances in movies and stuff like that. And, just start moving people off the surface of the Earth and put them into orbit where you have, lots of free energy, and that makes up for a lot of things you don't have. So, I think that that's maybe our future, because if it isn't our future, I'm not sure what our future is. We can't, I can't imagine 100 billion people on the planet Earth. That sounds a little too crowded for me. Mm-hmm. It'd be hard to find a parking space. So I do think that eventually we'll have to move at least some of the population, if not the majority of the population, into outer space. And maybe we just turn the surface of the planet into a national park, or maybe an international park.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, you mentioned that it was pretty popular. It was a popular idea in the 1960s and 70s to have this. I'm 25. I've actually never even heard of this concept. What do you think happened to that idea? Just people got more excited about Mars, or?
Yeah, it hasn't happened. I mean, the prediction was, I remember this now quite well, even in the 1960s, it was predicted that by 1990 or 1995, there would be millions of people living off Earth. Millions. That's a lot of company. I mean, you get together for a card game. If you got millions of people to choose from, it's going to be okay. But it hasn't happened. And the reason it hasn't happened is that it's not that it's, technically impossible to do that. It's not. It is expensive, however, and it's still cheaper to build condos in Arizona than to move a whole lot of people into orbit. But that won't be the case forever. Eventually, even Arizona may get crowded. So this is going to happen sooner or later. It just may be later rather than sooner.
Do you have any idea of what the tipping point would be, where everybody eventually, it would become more feasible, cheaper, more economical to move to space?
Well, the pressure in the past was always population pressure. If we just kept on increasing the population the way we were doing 30 or 40 years ago, then, by the end of this century, you would say, we got to get some of these people out of here, right? But as it turns out, the growth in population is kind of leveled off, right? And so the population isn't growing very quickly. And, if you could keep it to zero increase, which you could do, you just, you can, I don't know, you call up some local office to get permission to have a baby, right?
There'd have to be some laws in place, yeah.
yeah, there would have to be some control there. But, and if you can foresee a future like that, if that appeals to you, then maybe we could stay on Earth for a long, long time. But eventually, even if you control the population, we're running out of all sorts of stuff. I mean, I'm not just talking about, gold or top 40 hits or anything like that. I'm talking about things you really need, like zinc, right? Or copper, or then, we keep using it up. And sure, you can recycle everything, but I don't know how much zinc you recycled last week. I didn't
I actually have recycled so much zinc recently. It's incredible.
Have you?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, this is kind of a zinc and swim world that we're anyhow.
Nice.
It's
in the studio. We're loving it.
I don't know. Both of the listeners might love it, but I doubt it. In any case, we could, I mean, obviously these very fundamental elements and for that matter, some compounds, that we use to make sure we have that gusto-grabbing lifestyle that we all wish to have. There's infinite supply. So eventually you're going to have to get people off the planet to do nothing else than to mine the asteroids, right? Because a lot of this stuff can be found in the asteroids. And, nobody seems to mind if you take them. So, you have to set up some smelting operation off Earth. This you can also see in sci-fi films. We have mining projects around the solar system. But there's lots of stuff. So we're not going to run out of stuff. There's also even more energy, right? The sun's putting out, it's 10 to the 26 watts, 4 times 10 to the 26 watts for people who like, that kind of number. But the real point is that the sun puts out something like 2 billion times more energy than, hits the Earth. So that's much, much more energy than it takes to run our society. Our society runs at about 10 trillion watts, something like that. And, there's much, much more energy coming off the sun, which is doing nothing. It's just going out into space. It's not doing anything useful. Mm-hmm. So, there's plenty of energy around, and we just, can't get it economically enough yet, but that can change. So look, the future's bright, man. I mean, they may start charging you more for a postage stamp because, sending a letter to Mars might cost more. But, yeah. But otherwise, things are good, in my opinion.
That's kind of a fascinating way to think about it. I think when we're thinking of certain movies and just sci-fi in general, whenever we think of shows like The 100, typically what it is we all get in a spaceship and then we just launch off to somewhere random and the ship just keeps going. But kind of with what you're talking about, it's more so that we just look around what's in our neighborhood and we decide to start saying we have a lot of energy in our solar system being wasted on nothing. So we find out better ways to capture that. We also have all these minerals that are out there that we need to be able to take advantage of. Well, we have the asteroid belt right there. And we can basically have almost a limitless supply, at least relative to the amount of humans on Earth, of resources just by going just outside of our planet, not even outside of the solar system.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff around. And as you have pointed out here again, we don't use very much of it. And we don't use very much of it terribly efficiently. So we can still have a good life here, even if you say, I'll always love Earth. I mean, okay, that's fine. And, that'll work for a while. And maybe a long while. Maybe it works for, another 10,000 years or who knows what. But, eventually, you may want to do something else. But if you're talking about eventually, you might have the technology to do something else. We can't go to the stars very easily. I mean, you can call up Scotty in the engine room and tell him to put the pedal to the metal, but, there is no engine room. There's no Scotty. So it's really hard to go to another star system, right? Our fastest rockets go, I don't know, like 10 miles a second. Not an hour, of course, 10 miles a second. And
that's crazy.
That's pretty fast if you're, if you're just going to National City or something. But if you want to go to some other star system at that speed, it's still going to take you, many tens of thousands of years. And that's a long trip. You can, all right, you put the whole crew into suspended animation, whatever that means. I mean, we don't do it because we don't know how to do it. But, maybe you can figure out something there.
What's suspended animation?
Suspended animation is when the Mickey Mouse cartoon stops in the middle. No, suspended animation is you're still alive, but it wasn't that funny, Gary.
That was good. We are all dying.
You might be, but not because that was funny. Anyhow, suspended animation is it's like, putting you to sleep for a while. You're still alive, but you're not conscious. You're not doing anything. You're not moving around.
Gotcha.
You're not. It's a frequent trope in sci-fi films, actually, or even TV for that matter. They put people into some sort of pod, right? And then they wake up, 100,000 years later, raring to go and really hungry. And, that way the long rocket ride doesn't bother them.
Right. That way it makes sense as well for a sci-fi setting.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Always favorite pods.
Yeah, our next closest solar system, or not solar system, our next closest galaxy. How close is that?
Well, next closest galaxy. Galaxies are big and far apart. The closest galaxies to the Milky Way galaxy. If you really mean galaxy, if you're talking about stars, that's a different thing. But
I guess, I mean star. So how close?
Okay. Well, the closest stars, other than the sun, obviously, is Proxima Centauri. You have to speak Greek if you want to.
If you want to be able to talk about the stars.
Yeah, although I think that's really Latin. But in any case, it's 4.5 light years, almost 4.2 light years away, something like that. In other words, you shine a laser at it and it'll take 4.2 years to get there, even though it's traveling at the speed of light. In a NASA rocket to go to Proxima Centauri takes 75,000 years. So that's a long ride.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So it'd be a long time before we could ever get to something that's like, presumably in the Goldilocks zone that's outside of our solar system.
Yeah. It's not trivial, but, people, they believe what they see in the movies or on TV, and they think, oh, well, it's just a matter of building a better rocket. Yeah, but it's also an energy consideration. It's hard to get that much energy together to get yourself up to a speed that would allow you to get somewhere before you die.
Yeah, and to find maybe kind of, because of the fact that the vast majority of people would die, to find hundreds of generations of individuals who are just open to the idea of, let's travel to this next place.
Yeah. Although I have to say that about 20 or 30 years ago, there was some sociologists, they were in Austria, I believe, but in any case, they sort of looked into that. And they decided that, maybe you could, put a whole bunch of people on a interstellar rocket ship and tell them to send back postcards once they got to another solar system. But the experience on Earth was that they would get into fights and they would kill one another long before they ever got there.
Yeah.
I think that's a bit too optimistic myself, but that's what they said.
That's funny. So when we're talking about SETI and looking to see whether or not there's life on other planets, do you study any planets outside of our solar system or anything outside of our solar system when looking for life? And how do you do that since it's so far away?
Well, people do that, actually. I mean, one of the biggest stories in science, at least, of the last 30 years, since 1995, when we found the first planet around some other star, right? What are called exoplanets or extrasolar planets. That was a big story, by the way. You won't remember it because you were not old enough to.
But yeah.
Yeah. For example, that could have interfered a bit. Yes, but that was a big story. I mean, we had always been told, at least my generation was always told, oh, there are probably plenty of planets out there. But that was easy to say because nobody knew, right? And beginning in 1995, we began to actually know. We began to actually find planets around other stars. And it turns out what everybody was telling you, there are probably lots of planets out there. That was true, unlike many other things they told you. So it turns out that just about every star has planets. There are a lot of planets out there. as I say, the number of planets in our galaxy is like, a trillion, roughly.
How many? So based off of the idea, like of the Goldilocks zone, and obviously having water, and then I think it's very difficult to be able to track how much carbon are on these exoplanets. But based off of the amount of planets that are in the Goldilocks zone that have water, is that an extremely common occurrence, or is that like relatively uncommon?
Doesn't seem to be terribly rare. We don't know in many cases. The problem is you want a planet that's maybe roughly the same size as Earth, because if it's much, much bigger, then it tends to have a gaseous atmosphere for reasons that are, not suitable for public radio. But if they're about the same size as Earth, are there a lot of planets that size? Yeah, there seem to be. It's hard to know for sure because small planets, and the Earth is a relatively small planet, are the hardest, of course, to find because they don't do much in terms of
visibility,
making themselves visible. Yeah, but they seem to be common.
Why are bigger planets typically more gaseous?
Well, it's just that the most common element in the universe is hydrogen. 3/4 of the universe is hydrogen, actually. There's a lot of hydrogen out there. And, the other elements that are very common are things like, helium, believe it or not, and, some other gases. Our solar system was formed when gases and dust kind of coalesced under their own self-gravity and started making, planets and things like that. And, of course, the sun. And you look at stars. I mean, what is the sun made of? Mostly hydrogen and a little bit of helium and some other elements, but it's mostly gaseous material. So the universe is, filled with a lot of gas. And
makes sense. Yeah, just kind of there's more of it to be able to accumulate.
There's much more of it. Yeah.
Also, it's lighter, so I assume that a gravitational pull, it's easier to kind of bring it in.
Well, that's the only thing you can use to bring it in general. Yep.
Yeah, makes sense. Yep. Okay. Cool. I do want to pivot really quickly. For these last 15 minutes or so, I'd love to know a little bit more. My parents would kill me if I didn't ask about kind of a little bit more on UFOs and kind of your article in particular against them, or kind of, I think it was called, David Grush made a truly extraordinary claim, but it requires extraordinary evidence. And I guess I wanted to start it off with, have you seen the videos and with respect to the Tic Tac and Tic Tac flying object, and then also kind of seeing the congressional hearings relating to a giant football field by football field square or cube in the sky? Yeah.
Well, the thing about that, yes, and the answer to your question, have I seen that stuff? Yes, I've seen it. But keep in mind, when people say, oh man, that thing over there, it's the size of a football field. The only way you can know that is A, it looks like a football field, with the markings every 5 yards or something like that. Then maybe you're safe from saying it's a football field size object. Or how far away it is. Because if you just see, a square or a thing that looks like a peanut, you have no idea how big it is unless you know how far away it is, right? So that's an important point. We don't know how far away that the peanut that we see in those videos really was, and it could be. I mean, this has been, you can find this on the web. There's a guy down in where is Mick West? I think he's. Well, let me not guess where he is. But anyhow, he's a very clever guy who was sort of looked at these videos and said, that peanut-looking thing, right, is probably nothing more than a jet aircraft far in front of the F-16 fighter jet that made the photos, right? Because these photos were made with infrared cameras, gun sight cameras, on the F-16 jets, and so they're sensitive to heat. So if you have an aircraft, say 70 miles in front of your jet or something like that, and you're following it more or less, well, then the exhausts from the jet engines is more or less aimed in your direction. And of course, they're very hot, which means they emit a lot of infrared light. So you'll see a double blob because there are two of them or four of them. There'd be, a bigger double blob. And so you get a double blob, and that's what they look like. And then when they rotate, it's because the jet is banked to go in a slightly different direction or whatever. I mean, you don't need to invoke aliens is the point. And if you don't need to invoke aliens, then why do you do that? Only because it's more interesting? You know, you should really go with the devil you know.
It's definitely more interesting than the jet engine.
Yeah.
But I guess that also kind of makes sense when you hear that story, right? I'm trying to remember his name. David.
Grush?
Yeah. Or, well, yeah, there was Grush, and then as well, I'm trying to think of the fighter pilot who saw the Tic Tac that was going on. And then
there's kind of the name of Flavor, maybe.
Yes. Yeah, Flavor, or either way, when he saw it in particular, he also mentioned that a few seconds later he gets a call from somebody 60 miles north at his cap point, and they say, hey, that same signal is picking up here. So kind of, I guess what you're saying is that literally that could have just been the jet engine, or like a jet that now we're able to receive signals 60 miles away, or like heat signals on infrared visualization 60 miles away from where it's actually occurring. So it could literally just be a jet, and then it's heat 60 miles behind it.
Yeah. All I'm saying is that, I mean, even laying aside the details of the observations, is that these can all be explained very prosaically. And that isn't to say that the real explanation isn't prosaic. But if you're given two explanations, just a commercial jet 50 or 100 miles in front of you, or alien spacecraft, commercial jet, alien spacecraft, commercial jet, alien spacecraft. What are you going to go with? If you go with the alien spacecraft, that's fairly radical.
Yeah. Do you think that, I guess, today aliens are like the equivalent of ghosts, maybe like 200 years ago, where we're just trying to find something and pin it for something that we can't understand?
Yeah. It's like spirits or whatever, right? Ghosts are good too. I've got ghosts in the attic because I hear, strange noises late at night. Well, it could be ghosts in the attic. It might be. On the other hand, it could be, roof rats. I mean, I don't know. Right? So, what are you going to go with? I mean, you're going to believe that it's ghosts simply because that's more interesting than rats? I mean, ghosts are more interesting than rats, I think, but
Yeah. So I think that that's a good point to understand, right? Is that we're not generally in your take where we're saying as you understand it, there's likely not extraterrestrial life here on Earth. You're not discrediting or saying that there's some sort of situation that can't be explained, that's unidentifiable, but you are saying that there's likely a prosaic answer that explains all of it. We just aren't taking the time to look into it because it's a lot easier to say alien or ghost or spirit or what have you.
Yeah, you're not going to tune in a TV show where they say, hey, look, we're going to tell you tonight about how 50 mile away commercial jets are sailing the skies of America. I mean, it's just not very interesting. The sensational definitely trumps the mundane.
Yeah. What was that radio show? My grandmother used to always listen to it, but I think it was like Coast to Coast.
Probably Art Bell.
What was that?
Art Bell.
Was it Coast to Coast that he used to host?
Yes, Coast to Coast AM.
There you go. Yeah, every night my grandmother used to listen to it, and obviously it was very entertaining for myself as a kid, very entertaining for her, kind of as an adult. And just kind of that's the reason why we can see so many UFO sightings and such.
Well, that could be. I have to tell you, I was on Art Bell's show, and then I've been on it since he died, actually, with the current host many times. And it's always good fun. I enjoy it. The part I enjoy the most are when the audience is encouraged to call up and ask their questions, because it would really astound you, the kind of questions that people ask.
Oh, I've got to ask. What were some of the best questions that you received?
Well, I can't remember them now, but they would just, they had very, if you will, exotic theories, as we've kind of discussed here, for what people had seen. And then, there would also be things like appeals to the integrity of the person making a claim, right? Somebody says, I saw these things up close, and they are clearly not any kind of craft that we've built here on Earth. This is not human technology, clearly extraterrestrial technology. that was the sort of the gist of a lot of them. But, what do you do with that? You can tell them, well, obviously nobody knows because the claim was made 15 years ago. But, I'm suggesting to you that one possible explanation doesn't involve aliens, and you should consider that.
Gotcha.
Of course, nobody wants to consider it.
I've got 2 final questions for you, and we'll close out here. But I do want to know, what do you think happened at Roswell?
Well, I think that this was all organized by the Roswell Chamber of Commerce because,
Genius.
I don't know. I've been to Roswell, actually. And, the entire downtown is given over to businesses that sell, alien tchotchkes, right? I mean, it's been the best thing that ever happened to Roswell. But there is a story there, and that is that south of Roswell, I think it's south, is the Roswell Army Air Force Base. And that's been there a long time. And in the late 1940s, in fact, there were incidents there, the primary incident being that some rancher, who was actually northwest of Roswell, found some debris on his ranch, just there in the dirt. And he called up, I think he collected it and took it to the Roswell Daily Record, which was the newspaper from the city of Roswell. And he showed it to those guys, and they ran a headline that said, "Alien craft found outside of Roswell." But they didn't know what this stuff was. So it was probably an alien, craft. And then the next day, the headline changed somewhat because they started getting feedback from the military guys. And they changed it to "weather balloon found northwest of Roswell." The truth is that it was probably this, a balloon experiment that was being run out of the Army Air Force Base. Every couple of weeks, they would send a balloon train, which is just a string of balloons up into the upper atmosphere. And they had some electronics that was being lifted up there that was very sensitive to audio, just audio signals, in other words, sound. And what they were trying to do was test the system that they were hoping to use to determine whether the Soviets had the bomb. And the whole idea was, you would launch these balloon trains just outside the borders of the Soviet Union and listen for a bang. Fundamentally, that was it, right? So they were trying that technology out. Now, of course, that was all classified at the time, by 1948 or 49. We knew the Soviets had the bomb, but at least for a couple of years, this was a viable project. And so that's what they were doing. But of course, so the government couldn't, admit to that for obvious reasons. So, it spawned all this conspiracy thinking. And I think it's been suggested, not unreasonably, that this was the story that led to the public's distrust of what the government says about these sorts of things. Gotcha. So you're saying that there were definitely aliens there, no other explanation. I feel like I heard you loud and clear. Yeah, that's exactly what I said. Quote me on that.
No, that's actually a fact. Like, honestly, I didn't know all the story behind it. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Obviously, that the government, it's probably even safer to let the story run where everybody starts believing that there's aliens than to actually admit, hey, we're actually doing spy missions on the Soviets right now and admitting to that. So
yeah, and by the way, even though our government does that, I can tell you that apparently the Soviet Union's government did it even more often, the equivalent at their end.
So I'm assuming that they have a lot of alien stories as well that we just haven't heard of.
So I'm told.
There it is. Cool. Well, I know that obviously you're very interested in outreach, getting people excited about the exploration for life outside of our planet. I do want to give you the floor, and thank you so much for coming on, but I want to give you the floor maybe to have a one-minute speech or spiel to anybody who might be listening to this and why they should be interested and what they can do to get more involved with SETI, with exploring life on other planets.
Yeah. Well, I would simply encourage them. I mean, if you have the curiosity, if you're interested in space exploration or astronomy, or for that matter, even SETI, if you're interested in these sorts of things, I'd encourage you to just go to the local library. You can find plenty of material on this stuff. You can also, of course, go to, we have a website here at the SETI Institute. It's just SETI.org organization. And we also have a weekly radio show, believe it or not, called Big Picture Science. So these are all places you can repair.
You said places where you can repair what?
No, I'm just saying places you can go, basically.
Gotcha.
We can go.
Okay, cool.
Except my internet connection is unstable because the aliens are listening in.
They've caught on. They've caught on. Awesome. Well, Dr. Seth Shostak, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. And for all of us here at Stay Classy, I do want to say howdy howdy is outy outy. And that's a wrap.
Terrific. Thank you
so much.
This has been another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks again to our sponsors, MaxLux Media at maxluxmedia.com and Dorado Nutrition at doradonutrition.com. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning into the show. See you next time. Stay classy, San Diego.